welcome to today's podcast. And today I'm with Mark Eddowes, and he works with the Minister of Culture for French Polynesia.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking, as he is an archaeologist, we'll be talking a little bit about things that people should know when they come to French Polynesia about the various sites, as well as some of the archaeology that's been discovered and uncovered over the last number of years, as well as just some really interesting things about this culture and how it's developed for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for joining us on the
You're
podcast.
welcome.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
This podcast is sponsored by Far and Away Adventures. For over 30 years, I've helped travelers explore the destinations highlighted in this podcast. To have an expert plan your next vacation, contact farandawayadventures.com or check out the show notes. Mark, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got started in archaeology? And
Well, I guess it goes back to being in New Zealand as a kid. And I was always interested in Maori stuff. And eventually I went on to do studies at university. And when I was doing my master's, the subject I chose was Marae, temples of Polynesia. And fortuitously, at that point in time, there was a collaborative project put together by New Zealand, University of Hawaii at Manoa, the University of the Sorbonne in Paris, and the Department of Archaeology of French Polynesia. The idea was that in Tahiti, they were going to build a hydroelectric dam in a valley called Papenoo, which is 17 kilometers long, and that would provide electricity for the whole of the island of Tahiti, reduce the bills and all that. The valley full of archaeological sites, and so we at the University of Auckland in New Zealand were asked to participate. So I came as a student, came back from holiday, a kind of free Christmas break, and my professor said, "Mark, you don't need to go back to the Cook Islands," which I love, but do you want to go to Tahiti to study some Marae over there? And I was like, yes. So that's what happened. So I came. At that point in time, this is back in the 80s when France sunk the Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbour. So that was not a great relationship between New Zealand and Australia. New Zealand and, France. And so the French government was offering research possibilities to New Zealanders to come out into the Pacific. And so after I finished my thesis on Marae, having worked in Papenoo Valley, excavating sites that were going to be impacted through the building of the dam, I was asked to stay as an archaeologist, an Anglophone archaeologist in the territory, and that's what I did.
And how was that, being an Anglophone archaeologist?
It was not easy.
In this area, yeah.
I had Maori language skills, but I didn't have French. And they told me you have to really just stop specializing, if you like, in learning Tahitian and just learn French, be adopted into the system. So I did that. And that's been the same ever since. I've worked as a kind of free agent, independent researcher, working for the government principally here on archaeological sites, and then to make a bit more pocket money or have a bit of a break, I do some of the lecturing on the Aranui.
Okay. Well, we're on the Aranui, and we're traveling around the Austral Islands, and we're basically on our way to Rapa, but we've come from Rurutu and some of the other islands. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the things that you have done in this part of the French Polynesia?
So in the Austral Islands, because anciently the Austral and the Cook Islands were the same culture and language, it was a unified archipelago, if you like, from the island of Rapa all the way back to Rarotonga. But in the 19th century, the British and the French divided it into two territories. So we have the eastern part is the Austral Islands, and the western part is now the independent country of the Cook Islands. That's dependent on New Zealand slightly anyway. And So the history of the two people was separated from around 1900 on. And so what I'm trying to say is that I work both in the Austral Islands and the Cook Islands because on the same subject, which is predominantly temple sites, Marae. So back in the 80s and 90s, I worked on Rimatara Island in the Australs, and I did the site survey for sites on Rimatara and the identification of Marae sites. After that, I went on to work on Tubuai Island. And actually, Tubuai was slightly different because it was an excavation looking at a settlement site. So when the island was first settled by Polynesian ancestors. And after that, I did more work looking at the statuary of Raivavae in the Austral Islands, the cult of the tiki. All the tikis from Raivavae are women, and they had a cult of deified ancestors who were female, whereas in other communities, it's all male ancestors in the tiki, represented by the tiki figures. So I'm very interested in that, and the connection of that island with the Marquesas. Yeah. So that's the difference with that island and the other islands in the Australs. It's clear that Raivavae was settled first by people coming from the Marquesas Islands, whereas the other islands were settled by people coming from the societies.
Okay.
So those are the type of things I've been kind of looking at in religion.
Neat. And what would people visiting this area, what will they notice or what will stand out for them?
Well, I think first of all, the first thing is just how natural the places are, because they really have not been developed from the 19th century. So you're going to find pretty small populations of very beautiful little subtropical islands, because that's what they are, on the same latitude as the North Island of New Zealand and the same latitude as the Cook Islands. So it's kind of fresher climate than we have in Tahiti and the Marquesas Islands. You're going to find people that are totally independent in terms of everyday life. Life in the islands here is still totally geared towards working in the plantations in the taro fields for yams, sweet potato, breadfruit, bananas, and things like that, and fishing. So there's two kind of activities that provide their everyday economy, if you like.
I noticed they live day by day.
Oh yeah, totally.
Extent.
That's still the Polynesian types that get up in the morning. It's all family based, so there's a solidarity in the community. You don't need to worry about anything. All you've got to worry about is that you do your part of the work. So you go out at 7 in the morning, you go to the plantations, you go out fishing, and then everything's kind of shared between the family and the community.
Yeah.
There is a cash economy. Obviously, it's very important because don't think they're living in grass huts from the benevolence of the natural world. That's a myth. Today, people live in a cash economy society, so they want a wee bit of money to go and buy things at the general store. And that's why the women in the islands particularly specialize in weaving of the Pandanus. It's called whara, rau whara. And that's particularly the case for Rimatara and Rutu and the Raivavae Island, even with Tubuai. But it's the way that the women, through their dexterity of a very ancient technique, weaving mats, hats today, and fans and all these kind of things, make these beautiful artworks that then are sold to visitors or exported to Tahiti to be sold. And then I've noticed in the last few years something that wasn't around very much, a little bit, but not too much, about 40 years ago, carving. Because anciently the Austral and Cook Islands were renowned for the quality of this beautiful carving of food bowls, kava bowls, where you have these starburst designs, very beautiful, finely cut geometric designs. You can spot an Austral Cook Island sculpture straight away. But the missionaries banned all these things, you see, so it disappeared. So the only people that were carving 40, 50 years ago were the Marquesan people. Now I've noticed that the young men here are starting to carve again, and they're getting copies of the motifs in museums, and they're creating ancient copies. So what I'm trying to say is that the men now are getting back into wood carving.
Okay.
And as you saw, they're selling them. They're very beautiful. It's all from here. Nothing's brought in. Nothing's from China, Taiwan, or the Philippines. It's all here, made out of native hardwoods.
Well, it's interesting too, because as you mentioned, I mean, as an archaeologist, you're discovering things out of stone and maybe a bit of wood and other things like that. But the fans and the weaving that they're doing, obviously, those things don't preserve.
Right.
And so that is passed down by teaching one generation to the next.
That's what survived. Weaving, they're ancient, like you say, it doesn't survive in the archaeological record. We're not going to pull a woven mat out, maybe in a burial cave, but then we don't really go looking for that kind of thing in that kind of place, but you'll get a mat or something. But yes, you're right. So those practical things, the British missionaries didn't ban weaving. They banned the motifs that were pagan motifs in the weave. So the weaving techniques and the artistry has survived because they're very artistic people. And then the hats, obviously, nobody had hats in ancient times. The British brought those British kind of hats. And so the people translated them into woven pandanus like they do in the Cook Islands. And so that's something that is millennial at the same time, but totally innovative. Yes. And anything like plume work, because anciently there was a lot of feather work in the islands.
Okay.
As you saw in Rimatara, we have a little lorikeet called the Vini Uda, the red lorikeet.
Oh, very colorful.
Beautifully colored, rainbow colored, right?
Yeah.
But with a chest that's scarlet red, and those were used to ornament chiefs' headdresses. Those have all gone, don't survive in the archaeological record. So there are certain things that came through time, other things were lost. It's unfortunate. And now we've got this renaissance, at least in the sculpture, which is great.
Well, and I guess what are some things that visitors to these islands should be mindful of when they visit some of these archaeological sites?
Well, I think when you're visiting the Australs, you have to, well, first of all, let's talk about the archaeological sites. Okay. So, for example, in Polynesia generally, that's where we get the word taboo from, right? Is Polynesian languages, which means forbidden, put to one side, not to be touched or visited or whatever. So a temple in Marae is a highly sacred site, even if the people are all Christians today, and have turned away from that, because in the Christian ideology, that's not something you want to be concerned with in their mentality. It comes from Te Tau Etene, the time of the pagans. And so we move on. We're in Te Ao o Jehovah, the time of Jehovah, Te Ao Mara Marama, the world of light. So you have to understand these people have a very particular view of archaeological sites. It's not at all like us. But they respect them because their ancestors built them. The bones of their ancestors are in those things. And so they're very respectful. So they do not like people touching them too much, So when you come to the Australs, just remember, even if you're on a bicycle, you go around the island and you'll see a sign saying the Marae, Taputapuate, or Haritata. Go and have a look, but just take a photograph. Don't physically go onto them. Don't play with the stones. Never take anything from the Marae, and just respect them. So that's something Polynesians find a little irritating with visitors when they just immediately go onto these sites or start approaching or touching the stones and things like that. Cemetery in Rimatara, the royal cemetery of the Tamaiva line, you should never physically approach or touch the wall of the cemetery or go in the cemetery. You can see it perfectly well from outside. But that would be a taboo that you should respect. So that's something in terms of archaeological sites that are visited. The second thing I think is important for visitors, and you have to remember that the Austral Islands is still kind of like the Bible Belt of Polynesia. Hugely Protestant, extremely conservative. So you mustn't mock the church. In conversations with Polynesians, don't try and be the wise, how would you say that, an agnostic or something. Just respect that you're in islands where people are good Christians, their communities function at a family level and at the level of the paruas, the church. First thing. So, for men, particularly European men, because I can't understand why they have to do this, but they seem to think it's okay to come off a beach in a Speedo. It's not very pleasant to look at. So just pull on a pair of shorts out of respect for the local people. You won't see Polynesian men wandering around in underwear. And for women, if you're wearing a bikini, put a pareo on. It's offensive to see, even if you're a beautiful 20-year-old from California, whatever. Out of respect for the people, when you get off the beach, just take a simple pareo, a little wrap, put it on. You're perfectly dressed to go back to your hotel. But don't walk around half naked. Certainly don't go topless on the beaches over here. And just be respectful that you are in a community that is different. It's a bit like probably your own country in the 1940s or 50s. Think of it like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's very important because Tahitians get a little... These people have been converted by Western missionaries. So they say, we don't understand. We were taught to cover ourselves in the missionary robe and all this. And now your own women are sitting on the beach practically naked. You know, we don't get it. You brought us the word. It's just something to remember in the Austral and Cook Islands.
Well, one thing I do notice when I travel around here is people are very modest in their dress, and some places more than others. Like you go to Tonga and other places, and it's even more so in Samoa. But I think it's important for people visiting these islands to really understand how they can respect the people they're visiting and the area they're going to. And Tahiti, because it has a lot of tourism, you know, they accept people for wherever they're at, but at the same time, there is a way to reciprocate that respect.
Yeah, you're right. You know, Samoa and Tonga, because Wesleyans and Methodists and all this, and that's, like you say, much more Christian values. And you don't, you know, a Tongan girl would never show her body on the beach. My God, not going to happen, you know. And Samoans as well, and rightly so. You come to Tahiti. Tahiti's ruled by the French. So French men and women have a very laïc, non-Christian view of how to do things. And so Tahitians have kind of got used to that. That's the majority of the tourists that come down here. So on the public beaches and all that, it's a bit like in Saint-Tropez in the south of France. Okay. But once you get onto the main road, you know, put on the patio, put on a hat. Men, put on a pair of board shorts. And that's all you need. And a towel around you. Just until you get back to your car, walking back to your hotel. So that is a good piece of advice.
Now, it's a very family-centered culture, is it not? Are there any signs that that's kind of come through the decades or the centuries?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go into detail because we haven't got time, you know, from an anthropological perspective. But the way people live today is not how it was in the past. It was a much more indigenous society structure, what we call age grades. So you didn't have a family as such. That was kind of created by the Christian missionaries, the Protestant missionaries. But what became the norm is a model 19th century Protestant family. That's what the Tahitians acquired through Christianity and through the missionaries living with them. So women were encouraged to look after their own children because in Polynesian society, traditionally, children were exchanged. You could have 6 or 7 moms, essentially. You know, it was a collective upbringing of children. So the Christian idea of the London Missionary Society is women, you're like Mary with her child. Your father's like Joseph, and your sons are what have you. Live in a Christian way, in a Christian extended family. And then everybody is related to common activities for the Protestant mission, or now the Protestant community, the Pauduas, as it's called. And so that is the center of life for these people. Even activities for young people, it's all Pauduasial. It's all organized by the pastors, the deacons, the elder women of the church in the communities, sports events, vacations, educational programs, all these kind of things are all church-based. Families, Tahitian, Rimatara, Tubuai, and Raivavae, they cannot live outside of their families. They can't live like Western people. Super hard for a Polynesian to live with a wife and their children in France with no other family around them. So they are still a people grounded in collective community. It might have changed into that kind of extended Christian family, but it is the whole family. So, for example, you might have the parents' house from the 1960s. They had 7 children. Well, those 7 kids will all be given parcels of land. The kids aren't going to go to another island, the other side. They want to live where the parents were. And then their kids and their kids. We call this quartier, like a neighborhood. And they tend to be the same family, multi-generational. So you don't have any problems looking after older people. They don't need care homes or they're not abandoned. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're involved. They love that. They say that. Our joy is the sound of children in the house. People in the 70s and 80s out here actually want that.
Yeah, I've noticed that. We've got some great friends in Bora Bora, and the mom and the dad have their kids close by, and then their grandkids, and then the great grandkids, and
that's it.
They really enjoy having that, and which is
people. I hate the word happy because I think that's just a construct, but content, certainly some of the most content people in the world, because you have a familiarity with all the people in your neighborhoods. You know them, and they're all kind of extended cousins. It's a whole network, and you feel very safe. You don't have the threat of exclusion or not being able to feed yourself or your family, or not having housing and not having, somebody that cares for you. So there's a very positive side to all that, that they can't live without. And like I say, are happier for it, much happier for it.
Well, one thing I did want to just ask you before we kind of wrap up here is, in the many years that you've been doing archaeology in this area, is there any particular discovery or thing that really stands out in your mind that has maybe kind of revealed a little bit to you about the people in this area?
Well, there's quite a few. I mean, where to start? There's been quite a few things things that have been kind of very important for me in my career, I guess, included finding a beautiful red volcanic tuff tiki, or ti'i, because we don't have K in the Tahitian language, on the island of Marae. And that was a very interesting find. Red is a sacred color out here. It's related to the red you see in the feather cloaks of the Hawaiian chiefs, the red of the volcanic tuff of the headdresses of the Moai on Easter Island. So for me, that was an interesting object of comparison with the symbolism of the color of red that we get throughout Polynesia. And as an object, it was a very nice sculpture. Another one we found was in Papenoo Valley when I first got here in the mid-80s. And that was a beautiful ti'i, a pregnant, the stomach's quite distended with the navel, the pito. And that had been reused. It's a very curious ti'i because we found it in a house alignment. We call this a wharipote, round-ended houses. So the alignment gave you the shape of the house, and then you had the veranda pavement and what have you. The house is rotted over the last 200 years. It's nothing. But in the alignment, there was a ti'i figure laid on its side, which is totally bizarre. Because normally a ti'i is a venerated ancestor. It should be on a little shrine. And then working more on that side, I realized what had happened. I came across a document totally by chance, written by a British guy called Stutchbury, who came to Tahiti in 1823. Tahitians had converted in 1815, massively after their chiefs. But some of them had decided not to live the Christian way and gone back to traditional living. But they hadn't gone back to their old religion. So what I think happened in this case, this is what's fascinating, it's a syncretic tradition, is they had an ancestral image before 1815 that they abandoned when they went to live around the church in the coast. They came back into the valley because they were disappointed with Western influence and, these awful alcoholics and stuff. They didn't know alcohol. You had all the whalers and whatever. They came back into the valley, but they went onto their ancient sites again. but they didn't go back to their old religion. Yet the tiki was an ancestor to be respected. And I think they took him off his shrine and put him in a very practical way within the house. And the other thing is the tiki was faced looking into the house on its side. So it's a positive thing. It's as though the ancestor is looking after the people in the house, but it's not a religious object. That's just an aside for me. It's the way the religion kind of changed with the influence of Christianity. Another thing I was fascinated was that I'm going back to work on this temple, a marae more called Nu'urua. And there was a huge upright on a marae. And when we started our work, it was leaning, so it was kind of in shadow, but it was quite a big thing. Anyway, towards the end, we'd finished the excavation and we restored it slightly. So we put the upright back. Beautiful, tall upright, about that high. It's really quite big. And then one day, totally by chance, there was an old fisherman sitting next to it towards the end of the day. I was just cleaning up. All the field crew had gone home. It was the end of the day and the sun was setting. And I came to talk to this old fisherman guy. We're talking, and then I looked at the stone and said, wait a minute, this is weird. Turtle petroglyphs that you could only see at a certain point where the sun is setting. And there were 3 turtle petroglyphs carved into that. Yeah. Unbelievable. Even the old man said, yeah, I didn't know there was that thing here. He'd grown up there because the thing had always been over since the abandonment of the temple. Mm-hmm. So in that way, fascinating. There are other things that are very interesting as well that I found, in particular about certain practices, but it's kind of delicate to talk about them. It's to do with anthropophagy, which you don't really want to talk about because it's a little contentious. But there are things, proof of certain practices that we have found in our excavations that do point to the less attractive side of life in ancient times, I guess, the more violent side of it. War societies, that's what they were, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, I guess people now, they can see some of these artifacts in the museum. They've reopened the museum.
Go to that museum in Punavia. Te Ana Waharau is what it is called in Tahitian. It is a fantastic display. It's really beautifully thought out, laid out. You see a lot of these artifacts in the museum.
Yeah, it was closed for many years.
At least 2 or 3 years, yeah.
Yeah, and it's reopened, but great place for those interested in seeing for themselves some of the...
And you'll see the Austral collections. Because Austral Island art is very hard to get access to. A lot of it was destroyed, so there's not as much of it surviving as there was in the Marquesas Islands. But you'll see the finest pieces are still preserved in the museum and exposed there.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your time with me. And I look forward to now going back to the museum with a new set of eyes.
There you go. That's good. Go Australs.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for tuning in. Discover your next unforgettable adventure at farandawasadventures.com. Experience the world differently.